37. Education and Sovereignty. James E. Wood, Jr., editor of the Journal of Church and State, ridiculed the notion of fundamentalists that, first, secular humanism is the faith of the state schools of the United States. He echoes the opinion that it is a paranoid delusion on the part of the religious right. He sees secular humanism as a myth whose perpetrators are the fundamentalists. He cites Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan as stating that neither he nor any who assisted in drafting the Education for Economic Security Act, 1984, which in part barred a school district from receiving funds to finance any course which involves secular humanism, knew of any school district that teaches a secular humanism. I'm not sure anyone knows what secular humanism is. Certainly no schools affected by the legislation teach it. Second, Wood affirmed the neutrality of the public schools toward particular religious faiths or traditions. Wood accepted the state schools' claim to neutrality at face value. The idea of neutrality is, however, a myth. Every person and institution has a perspective and a plan which involves a commitment. If God is indeed the creator of heaven and earth, and if the God of Scripture is the living God, to eliminate him from education is not neutrality but enmity. The most important consideration of all is not considered. No man can be neutral towards God. The idea of neutrality presupposes an objectivity on the part of man which is not tenable. Moreover, we cannot assume that neutrality is essential to establishing truth. If a man is neutral towards all things, then all things are equally meaningless to him. Not even God professes to be neutral. He speaks of hating certain things and persons. For example, Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 to 19. In the sciences, a hypothesis, which is a non-neutral presupposition, however tentative, is used in approaching factuality. Statist education is not neutral. Every subject in the curriculum, every textbook, and every regulation involves a non-neutral judgment. Courts of law are not neutral. In a murder trial, neither the court nor the law is neutral about murder. Rather, the quest is for justice in procedure and judgment, something very different from neutrality. As for secular humanism being a myth, Wood gives no evidence of any knowledge of schools of education, their textbooks and school textbooks. How would he account for such a teacher's textbook as the Humanistic Education Sourcebook? The 56 articles by major educators emphasize humanism. One article tells us that values evolve. Values are a human option, not a religious mandate. They are a product of our experiences. They are not just a matter of true or false. This places values beyond good and evil. Another article ridicules the biblical doctrine of man as a sinner. We are told, people are not evil. Still another essay is titled, Humanism, Capstone of an Educated Person. If secular humanism, that is, humanism as practiced by laymen, is a myth, how can we account for such writings? An April 1989 publication of the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, Moral Education in the Life of the School, totally ignores biblical morality. It follows Emil Durkheim, who held that the three essential elements in morality are, first, discipline, second, moral authority, that is, social in origin, which eliminates God, and third, autonomy, self-determination and the human being, not God as the sacred thing par excellence. The section on the morally mature person continues in the same vein. For education which pretends to be democratic, to neglect the biblical faith of the majority of Americans, or at least the largest element in the population, is hardly democratic. Even more, to neglect the religious faith which is basic to Western civilization is not only not a neutral stance, but, in fact, one of aggressive hostility. It is a hostility with serious consequences. In 1957, Kenneth Rexroth analysed what was happening to arts with the rise of the beatnik movement, which preceded the hippies. He noted that many of the most impressive developments in the arts nowadays are aberrant, idiosyncratic. The best popular fiction was concerned with the world of the utterly disaffiliated. Nelson Algren's thesis, he pointed out, was, "It is better to be out than in." It is of the greatest social significance that the novelists who say, "I am proud to be delinquent," are nevertheless sold in editions of hundreds of thousands. He concluded, "The disengagement of the creator, who, as creator, is necessarily judge, is one thing, but the utter nihilism of the emptied-out hipster is another. What is going to come of an attitude like this? It is impossible to go on indefinitely saying, 'I am proud to be a delinquent,' without destroying all civilized value. Between such persons, no true enduring interpersonal relationships can be built, and of course, nothing resembling a true culture, an at-homeness of men with each other, their work, their loves, their environment. The end result must be the desperation of shipwreck, the despair, the orgies, ultimately the cannibalism of a lost lifeboat. I believe that most of an entire generation will go to ruin. The ruin of Céline, Artaud, Rimbaud, voluntarily, even enthusiastically. What will happen afterward, I don't know, but for the next 10 years or so, we are going to have to cope with the youth we, my generation, put through the atom smasher. Social disengagement, artistic integrity, voluntary poverty. These are powerful virtues and may pull them through, but they are not the virtues we tried to inculcate. Rather, they are the exact opposite. An education which disengages itself from God and from its entire history is an education in love with death. It has, in Rexroth terms, the cannibalism of a lost lifeboat. Not surprisingly, state schools are today in a state of moral and educational lawlessness and anarchy. In an interesting passage, the novelist Erica Young spoke of marriage as no cure for loneliness, lovers as no panacea, sex as no final solution, and then said, "If you make your life into a long disease, then death was the only cure." Increasingly, more and more students see death as the only cure because life itself is rejected. Before the French Revolution, the world of writers was marked by hostility to everything positive. These men were the enraged. Prior to the Russian Revolution, Russian writers became nihilistic, as did youth, and they became an enraged class. Herzen, who was no champion of the old order, wrote with annoyance from London concerning these nihilists, the enraged. What struck me about them was the ease with which they despaired of everything, the ferocious joy of their denial, and their terrible ruthlessness. Despite their excellent spirits and noble intentions, our bilious ones can, by their tone, drive an angel to blows and a saint to curses. They exaggerate everything in the world with such aplomb, and not as a joke, but out of such bitterness, that they are quite unbearable. In education, as in society at large, to attack Christian norms is to gain favour as an intelligent and perceptive man. More than a few churchmen have gained national prominence by giving their voice to such cultured critiques of biblical faith and law. On June 18, 1943, during World War II, George Orwell wrote a poem about his crime of patriotism, that is, his desertion of disengagement from traditional values. He said, "One had the effrontery to write 3 pages calling me traitor. So black a crime it is to love one's country. Yet where's the punk that would have thought it's odd of me to write a shelf of books in praise of sodomy?" The enraged of our century are the enraged most of all against godly order. In 1968, the Rolling Stones, a rock musical group, introduced their song, "Sympathy for the Devil." Marshall Berwin, in writing on the student revolution of the 1960s, reported, as a member of that revolutionary element, how unnerving it was for many of them, when the facts of the Manson case began to emerge, to find how their world overlapped with Manson's. They were a part of the same counterculture, with the same music, drugs, sexual behaviour and more. The Weather people cheered the Manson murders. As an exemplary political act, they revelled in the language of revolutionary demonology. Berman found it appropriate that LSD was first used and celebrated not in shadowing bohemian enclaves, but at Harvard and at the UCLA Medical Center. All the same, Berman held, anyone who persists in the belief that good can follow only from good and evil only from evil, who believes, in other words, that he can live in this world and still keep his innocence intact, is a political infant. Human life is darkly ambiguous at its core. Our culture is in sympathy with the devil because it resents the claims of the sovereign God of Scripture. As a result, it will stomach any absurdity in the name of education. It will continue to tolerate the destruction of its children morally and intellectually. It will continue to tolerate crime in the streets and in every corner. It will continue to tolerate degenerate men as politicians. It will continue to do these things and more because it is said of the sovereign Jesus Christ, "We will not have this man to reign over us." Luke chapter 19, verse 14.